got to jump on and accept it.
Consider, there we are. Cool. So I've now got you.
Are we in?
Hello, everyone. We're in. Well, hello to everyone. This is Gus here.
Right.
We're doing a... thank you for joining another episode of Wine and Viticulture Education. My name is Gus Gluck. I'm a London-based wine bar founder, professional taster and importer.
And I am Dr. Dylan Grigg. I'm an Australian freelance viticulturalist, and you may know me, if not in person, by my cryptic Insta handle, G Dilla.
It is pretty cryptic, or not at all.
I can't let it go now.
I know you can't let it go, like it's done. But this is our continuation of our viticulture and wine series that we started 8 weeks ago, which is amazing. We're going to try and make this as conversational and but informative as possible. And all questions are welcome. We're both on Insta and we're both on YouTube live, and you can watch back the episodes back on YouTube if you'd like. And we now have a Patreon if you want to contribute as well, but we'll get back to that another time. But again,
and we can listen on SoundCloud too, no?
We can. We are. I'm starting to get the whole library up there, so you can literally do. It's going to be a real thing. But there's another big subject this week, which is pruning 101. You can ask us questions on the YouTube and also on the Instagram. So please do ask away. But it's on to you, Dylan, to give a little intro on pruning.
All right, nice one. Well, welcome and thanks, Gus. This was actually a request from a DM from someone in the audience, which is nice.
Awesome. Yeah.
So, in terms of pruning is a massive subject. So I'm not going to go into too much detail. What I want to do is try and give a bit of an overview so that we can talk, Gus, and have a discussion around the basics and the operations of pruning, and hopefully we can drop some interesting facts and maybe shed some light on some things that that aren't so clear or that you may not have known. So,
nice.
So I guess, how do we introduce pruning? Pruning is traditionally one of the most important procedures on the annual calendar. It's also, in terms of viticultural management, apart from planting, it's the most expensive thing you do each year in the vineyard, generally. It takes a lot of time. Yeah, it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of care. And in terms of a lot of the passes, Gus, you can add up in cents per vine or tens of cents per vine. But when it comes to pruning, it's up there with grafting, where it might be $1.20, $1.50, like $1 a vine. And if you've got 3,000 a hectare, you are...
That's amazing. I didn't realise that was the actual final cost. That's amazing.
Yeah, well, obviously, we'll get to the different styles, but it depends on the style of pruning. Of course, some pruning is really quick, just cut. Some pruning you can also run through with a machine beforehand to pre-prune. And mechanization is something that is that's really being pushed and trying to be adopted to bring the cost of production down, because cost of production just keeps going up in general. Yeah. But anyway, if we define pruning is removing of any of the living tissue of the vine. So that can happen in summer or in winter. But this discussion, we're really only talking about dormant pruning in winter. So if you picture a vine in winter with no leaves and just the brown shoots on it, that's what we're talking about. So why do we do it? Main reasons are we do it to adjust the form or the size of the shape of the vine to make it more manageable and to fit on a trellis or in a shape that we can work with. Those of you who have worked on really low vines or big bush vines might argue that it's not to make life easier. But the reality is it is in some respects. It's also one of the key things, and one of the things that we really always need to understand is that it is a tool that we use to balance vegetative growth and reproductive growth. So the pruning level and how we prune vines influences how they grow. So the fruit we get back, but also the vegetative growth or the shoots that we grow during the summer. And in saying that, depending on how many buds we leave or how we prune, we can manage the quantity and quality of the fruit or of the production. So pruning, one of the last major things I think I'll make a point of is that we select nodes, or I'll interchange probably between nodes and buds, but they mean the same thing, but we get to select nodes or buds with the desired level of fruitfulness. So that kind of leads into the two major types of pruning. So there's a myriad of types of pruning. I could make a list as long as both of my arms of all the different training techniques, trellis techniques that all have their own pruning name attached, but there's really short and long. Short pruning is where you have a long cane, and that's what grows during the summer. And then when it goes dormant, all the leaves fall off, and you prune that to between 1 and 3 buds to grow the next year. So that's short pruning. Long pruning is where you get that cane and you only you take the end off, but you might lay down 6, 8, 10 buds, and that's long pruning. So they're the two major styles. And what would drive that? Let's see if this comes up. Hey, you know I love a book.
Yeah.
It's in reverse. This picture here, for those of you on YouTube, and where are we on the Insta? This picture here, it's probably in reverse. But from this, you can see that along the grapevine cane, it depends by variety. It differs for all varieties, but generally the basal buds closest to the trunk are lower in fruitfulness. So they'll start low and then they'll have more fruit in the middle of the cane and less near the end. Okay. So if you want a greater yield, you put down a cane. If you've got a variety that can be very yield heavy, you might prune short, which is a way of limiting the yield. So that's the two main types of pruning, and also how we would choose, well, a very crude way of choosing the difference between the two. So one that's always comes up in, not that anyone admits to making wine from it, but Sultana is a variety that needs long pruning. Like there's no bunches in the buds until you get up past 6 or 10.
Oh, really?
Shiraz is a good one. That's most fruitful in nodes like 4 to 6, like in the middle of the cane. So if you want to reduce your yield, you can spur prune it. Whereas if you put down a cane, I'm sure you would have seen some pretty monster yields coming off Shiraz where they're loaded with bunches, which is undesirable.
Or it's desirable for certain people.
Okay, we'll put our quality hat on and say, in the realm we're talking, Gus, and the wines that
I know
we associate with.
Yeah, true.
We know which we know which shelf we're sitting on.
Yeah.
And a wall of fruit on a cane is generally undesirable, mainly because, mainly because it can indicate an imbalance. And if you don't have wires to catch that and the trellis designed to manage that, that fruit can roll over, exposing itself, putting the shoots on the bottom, on the top. It's it's not pretty.
A nightmare. Wait, so how do you know how much to leave behind or take off?
Experience.
But
if you don't have experience, I mean, there's all sorts of indices. There's like Ravaz index is one of the most popular, or the yield to pruning weight. So if you have a vineyard and you're not sure how much to prune, there's some guidelines that are given where you can weigh, you choose a panel of vines, like 3 or 4 vines or something like that. You weigh the fruit that comes off of those, and then you weigh the canes that come off of those. And the balance, the ratio of fruit to vegetative growth gives you a formula to work out how many buds you should retain.
Okay.
For example, or you can work on crude methods and say, well, 10 gram canes means that you've got not much vigor, and if your canes weigh more than 60 grams, you've got a lot of vigor.
Yeah.
And work in the middle. But as you become more experienced, you can walk into any vineyard and tell if it's been, well, barring excessive water and nitrogen and fertilizer, you can tell if it's been under pruned or over pruned based on the bud number per meter.
Okay.
So
then how important is pruning to the long-term health of the plant?
I guess that's a pretty important discussion because an important discussion point at the moment, because of late people are talking a lot about gentle pruning or respectful pruning or sap flow pruning, which one thing that perhaps we moved away from with mechanization and perhaps a short-term vision was just pruning for speed and making a lot of cuts on vines, which over time build up. So if you're making big cuts on a vine every year and you're just doing it willy-nilly, so to speak, these wounds actually build up over time. So if your vines are then 20, 30, 40 years old, every year, if you're making big wounds, you end up having 20, 30, 40 wounds on a vine. And a vine is basically, from the soil, and it's just really to conduct water from the soil. The roots pick up the water, pass it through little tubes, up through the trunk, into the cordon and out through the leaves. Now, if those little tubes, if those straws have got dead tissue and lots of what am I searching for? Lots of twists and turns, like a really tortuous route up the trunk or through the cordon, then the vine will have less vigor and it will be more difficult for that vine to extract the water, transpire the water and grow. So that can let in other pathogens such as Utipa, or we can just call them wood rotting fungi or bacteria, not really, but trunk disease. And trunk disease is a big deal in vineyards now, in vineyards over 10 years old. You see it coming in because of pruning style. So pruning to maintain the health of the plant needs to consider where you're cutting, how you're cutting, and it also needs to encourage vigor and health in the plant so that it can fight off and push out pathogenic fungi.
Okay.
So there's a heap of information online and a lot of people that will talk about the Italian Simonite and Sitch, their gentle pruning method, which is really good. I mean, it's great to have had an awesome understanding of pruning and then have it turned on its head with some new thoughts and new ideas about how to prune. So
so then that leads on to really so how have pruning techniques changed over the years? Have they improved or has it got worse?
I guess technically they've improved. Biologically, they've gotten worse.
Okay.
And now we're starting to see some of the negative effects of in terms of the biological side, some of the negative effects of all of these compounding cuts, like really rough pruning and quick pruning. So piece rate pruning, so like getting paid per vine. People aren't really going to bother looking at where the bud's going or how the sap's going to flow. They're just going to be making cuts. If they're getting paid a couple cents a vine, they want to do 1,000 vines a day. You know what I mean?
Yeah, completely.
So there's a financial driver which has maybe been squeezing people to not prune so well. But in vineyards where there's a lot of care and attention and people have taken the time to prune and prune well, then I think in these areas, these are the sites where vines will be able to grow old. So biologically, we've been really hard on the vines and we're just coming to understand that if we want vines to live longer, we need to look after them. You can't just keep hacking and cutting them back.
Completely.
Which is one thing, because I mean, they're a liana. They're designed to grow. They evolved to grow to the top of a forest and not be pruned. Maybe lose a shoot for from frost or lightning strike or God knows what, or herbivory being eaten. So they've got reserve buds everywhere, but to accumulate pruning wounds over time, they haven't evolved for that.
Yeah.
Technologically, we've kind of made that even worse with the advent of first hydraulic or pneumatic cutters, but second is electric cutters. I mean, in the power in your hand, you can cut through big pieces of wood, anything.
Yeah.
Which you give that power to people that aren't well trained or vines that aren't well set up, and a lot of damage can be done. Really well set up vines can be completely turned on their head, and 1 year of poor pruning can set them back by another decade or more.
We've actually got a question which is quite good, which is from James Garrett, who's actually a Plumpton student. If you know what your Plumpton is, it's like the leading agricultural viti uni in England. And he asks, are there particular countries or regions who are leading the way with pruning technique?
I think the countries and the regions that get the most for their most money for their wine, probably because they've got it.
Yeah,
they've got it to spend in the vineyard.
Yeah. So Burgundy.
Yep. Burgundy put a lot of effort into it. Bordeaux, the same. Also in Piemonte.
Yeah.
I remember having a fantastic tour through Toretto with Dave Fletcher once, and their team, and they adopted some of these pruning techniques and been running them for some time. So to not just see them as a once-off, but to see them how they'd been implemented over time from first planted vines. And now there's more and more people trying to adopt these and learning ways to work with these principles so they don't cost a fortune. But unfortunately, not all vineyards can afford this method of pruning. And some vineyards are production vineyards and they're planted to take fruit and they've got a lifetime of 25, 35 years and they'll get turned over.
It seems like in Australia, like some of the best people at pruning seem to, well, not micromanage, but they seem to be, that's one of their most important jobs that they seem to do. Like they want to manage it themselves and they really kind of, for them, it's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you hit the nail on the head, because if you've been out there, Gus, and you've been pruning your own vineyard, I mean, the best way to learn how to prune is to prune the same vines year on year, because you can see the direct results of what you've been doing, and you can see the direct results of things that are negative also. And to let that go can be a disaster. I remember one year I had a vineyard and I was establishing spurs on the trunk because the cordon, which is the wood across the top, had a lot of dead wood in it and it was dying and becoming unproductive. So I was establishing spurs in the sap flow to allow me to cut the head off and retrain. And a poorly supervised member of a crew was cutting those spurs off because they only wanted to see spurs on top of the vine and a clean trunk. And I was out there supervising, walking through every row. And there's a downside to having a big team in to smash out a job quick. By the time I got to this row, I'm like, hey, whoa, where are all my spurs? And they're on the ground.
Wow, bloody hell.
Damn, catch up to the bloke and go, hey, we need to keep these. These spurs are the future. Oh yeah, but you're not replacing them this year. No, we're not replacing them this year. We'll replace them when we've got 90% of the vineyard covered and we won't lose a crop.
We also had a question which was how do you differ your pruning methods with a 10-year-old vineyard versus a 50 plus, like in terms of pruning level?
I guess it's a good question. I guess there's so many variables, but if we just take the first ones that come to mind, a 50-year-old vineyard more than likely would be in not a state of decline, but it would be a mature vineyard. So its growth would be mature and its vegetative vigor would be somewhat balanced, because if it was excessively vigorous, it's probably pulled out or wouldn't be producing, or if it was really, really weak in its growth, the same thing. It would be pulled out or it wouldn't be productive. So let's just consider it's a balanced vineyard.
Yeah.
It's 50 years old. 10-year-old vineyard, at 10, vines still are a little bit youthful, perhaps. They may not have exploited their entire soil volume, and they can run like a pup. So a 10-year-old vineyard more than likely has a little bit more vigor than a 50-year-old vineyard, for one. But the other thing to consider is a 10-year-old vineyard, you're setting it up for another 40 years of life. So you want to be careful where you're placing your spurs, the angle of your spurs, the spacing between them, or if you're going with guyot or cane pruning, that you're establishing a good crown for replacement canes. Whereas if you inherit a 50-year-old vineyard that's been pruned poorly, it's a nightmare. You've got to start from scratch with a big layer of rubbish underneath already, and more than likely loads of dead tissue, more than likely trunk disease inside. So it's a challenge. To answer the question, if you've got a 50-year-old vineyard that's pruned well, which I've seen 70, 80-year-old vineyards that have been pruned by the same philosophy, the same family, the same process each year, in Spain particularly, awesome. You can see that the person had the same picture each year. And these bush vines, where the cuts are all on the inside, they always prune to a 2-bud spur with an outward-facing bud, and the next year cut that off. Never made big cuts, always small cuts, always consistent. Very little trunk. Very little trunk disease, and you can count the pruning wounds. Some of them you get well over 50, 60 before they just turn into old wood and you can't count them anymore.
That's pretty amazing.
It's pretty wild.
So also quickly, to kind of bring it back to wine, but how important is pruning for maintaining balance in the final wine?
I guess pruning is incredibly important, and it's one of the main goals is to encourage balance between vegetative, so shoots and leaves, and reproductive, so the fruit. So depending on your trellis style, like how your trellis is built, and how you prune, it can really influence fruit quality. So if you have a spur pruned vine, for example, and you leave too many spurs, you can have too many shoots. These shoots might be small, there'll be crowding, there won't be sunlight, there'll be disease or higher possibility of disease. Or if you've got a long pruned vine and you lay down, say, 15 buds, because you got a long cane, you're like, yeah, ripper, we're going to put 15 buds down. 15 this side, 15 that side, you got 30 buds on your vine, but the vine's only got the energy to push 15 or 10. Your shoots are going to be really short. They're not going to have the photosynthetic capacity or the energy to ripen well. You're going to have exposed fruit. So it's finding that balance. So through the pruning weight per meter of cordon, or the yield to pruning weight ratio, or some of these things give you a ballpark, and then experience helps to fine tune things even further and minimize your work in spring.
Okay. It's a Limus wine have, like comment says, let's say you have a rubbish vineyard where the only option is to go back to the ground due to lack of care. How long would you expect for it to come back to a reasonable level of vigor and yield?
It depends if you established a good trunk in 1 year, or if you just cut it off halfway down and it's reshooting. You would be surprised if there isn't a high virus load, if there isn't a lot of disease in that trunk and you've lost a lot of the root system already, those vines can throw a massive glory crop. Like they're trying to grow, but all of those conductive tubes, it's such a tortuous path, and there's so much disease in that cordon that once you cut them off and give that root system and that trunk free flow, man, they can go
Really
crazy, and you can have trouble controlling the vigor. So, Kite, I reckon you should be onto a good thing. And with your varieties you've got, maybe it's just the Pinot that might take a little bit more time, but it's a big shock and a big wound. So don't think that you can just cut them and do nothing. You've still got to show these vines a bit of love.
We also had like another question on YouTube, which is, hi guys, hi guys, is there a demonstrated relation between shoot topping, its timing, and malic tartaric acid dynamics in the bunches?
Shoot topping, I would have to look into that. I've got my pruning hat on, and I'm not sure why there would be a relationship between the acid species and topping if it's not related to lateral growth and shading, for example.
So what is shoot topping?
It's in summer when if you've got a vigorous site, because remember vines will just keep growing.
Yeah.
So if you've got a vigorous site or water, nutrient, and you've pruned appropriately, your shoots will grow up to the top of the canopy or the wires, and if they fold over and shade, it's bad news. So you cut the top off.
Okay.
The idea is that in the balance of the way the season grows, you top at a time when the source sink relationships are changing and all the energy goes to the bunches.
Yeah.
Cut them off too early, the vine goes, hey, I still need vegetation, I still need leaves, and it will pops out laterals, which is shading and more drama. Top it too late, it's folded over, and leaves, if they're shaded, go yellow, and then they start exporting, and you've got pH and malic acid issues in your wine.
Okay. So it's a non-conclusive answer for that question.
Hey, that was pretty conclusive. Conclusive that I need to do more research about direct relationships between topping and acid species in grapes.
Also,
hey, can you enable screen sharing, Gus?
Yeah, why? Is it not enabled?
Nah, because I could put up some happy snaps.
Okay, sorry about that, everyone.
That's all right. The pictures aren't that great on Insta anyway, so you can talk amongst yourselves. I noticed McForbes was McForbes putting a smart ass comment, or was that a legitimate question?
Like it was a comment. So Max said earlier, what did he say? He said something like, I hate you both. No, he said he said wage costs go up. So mechanization increases unless people get skilled up in a really important job. So it's kind of like a comment on kind of like the future of that. Okay, wow. Right, so what is this?
Totally. So you got that?
Yeah.
You can see this where I'm pointing?
Yeah.
It's just an example of how that, sorry, Instagram world. Oh,
No,
you're doing it for me. Awesome. And with my pointer. So this is just a picture I found of a cordon. So the arm of a vine, it had poor pruning across these spur positions. And all of the deep cuts had dried back into that cordon. And if you can see the brown wood on top of that, the brown semicircle, that's dead non-conductive tissue. And that is like all you can eat for wood rotting fungi.
Wow, okay.
And below that are functional conductive tubes that are feeding the shoots. Now, what's something that's wrong here, Gus, is the feeding tubes are on the bottom of that arm, but the fruit-bearing nodes are on the top.
So they have to go through the rotten tubes.
Well, they got to figure out a way to get around all of these big dead cankers, we call them, get around these cankers and get up to feed that vine.
Bloody hell.
Yeah. So have I got another one? Oh, no. There's an example of short pruning.
Okay.
So this guy, well, that was it must be about 132-year-old vine. And it runs, if you keep it still there, I can use my cursor and show that there's a big old trunk. And then up here, these cordons were laid down. So it had 1 year of cane pruning. And if you don't remove the cane, you can then just cut those shoots that grow from that cane and you've got a spur prune vine.
Oh, wow. Look at that.
So that's spur pruning. This vine, cane pruning. Pull back a bit with the camera on Instagus. Yeah, there we go. Oh, that's a before and after. Nice. So before a vine, you would look at a vine like that and you would consider how many canes were left last year. And then you'd look at the shoot growth off of those canes and say, okay, are these shoots the length that I want? Am I happy with the vegetative vigor versus the crop load, which hopefully you know when you come to prune it. And then you'll choose from your old spur positions, new canes to replace them. So this vine last year had 1, 2, 3 canes laid down, probably 10 buds each, probably 30 buds. And this next year it has 1, 2, 3 canes laid down.
Wow.
Another time. So that guy is, that's very old.
How old do you think it is?
I don't know. That would be, it's from a site that rhymes with can of mace. So
Can of mace. I mean, it's not exact, but it's pretty good.
you've got an idea.
Sorry, what
I
you saying?
did want to show. Sorry, I'm sharing again. Hopefully this loads up now. Have you got
Some questions?
Okay.
But don't worry, you load up some stuff if you've got some interesting.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Here we go.
Double me.
Can you see this?
Yeah.
All right. Pause it on there for InstaWorld. And this is an example of when pruners go out, as Mac mentioned, with less skill and a big driver to get the job done quickly. And instead of using hand snips and getting a sore hand, using electric or long-handled loppers, so they can cut through old wood and thick wood. So here we have the cordon, the horizontal wood, which is the permanent arm. And coming off of that, we've got spurs. So what has happened here is there's some old cankers around the base of this spur, but what was the intention was to establish a new spur position. So in following the principle of gentle pruning, we should have used the lower spur, the lower shoot, and made a cut across the top. So 1 cut, 2 cut, 3 cuts. But instead, the workers come with their electric snips and taken this young shoot here, which is a water shoot of unknown fruitfulness because it comes from a latent bud.
Yeah.
And cut the whole bloody spur off.
Shit the bed.
So we end up with, I nearly did. We end up with a water shoot, which is of unknown fruitfulness. We end up with a big wound that will dry back 1.5 times its diameter into that cordon. And we lose our fruitful shoot and the setting up of a long-term sap pathway.
So basically crap.
That goes back to your question of if you prune poorly, can it be detrimental to the vine structure? Absolutely.
So Aaron was asking, is it less damaging to knock off green shoots or multiple wounds in lignified wood?
Less damaging to knock off green shoots.
Yeah.
And the earlier you do it, the better. If you are knocking off shoots post-flowering, because when those shoots come out of the vine, if they're out of this year's growth, this year's wood, or they're out of old wood, around flowering, they set in their socket. And then those of you who have worked in vineyards would know that shoots just brush straight off until they get around about to flowering time. And then when you knock them, there's a little stub that's left because they start to set. If you leave your shoot thinning too late and pull them off, you actually rip the wood and make a wound, which is worse than winter pruning.
Okay.
But hand in hand, winter pruning must be followed by thoughtful summer pruning or shoot thinning to have a good cycle of vine structure and have shoots where you want them, because shoot thinning not only saves time at pruning time, but also reduces the number of wounds in winter when the vine doesn't have a capacity to recover, and when there's more of the trunk disease spores floating around.
So I'm also, and Black Book Winery, who are based in London, I had a question which was like regarding summer canopy management. Some have taken to not cutting canopy tops for the season. Thoughts on benefits or negatives on this?
Yeah, I've seen a bit of that. I mean, if you've got a balanced site, or if you've got balanced pruning, irrigation, soil nutrition, you shouldn't need to cut the tips. Tips should grow, and you should get your, depends what variety, but should get appropriate shoot length. Then once that you get past flowering, fruit set, closer to veraison, that lag phase, the shoot tip should kind of just slow down by itself.
Okay.
If you've got more vigor or higher capacity than you've left bud numbers, or you're restricting your bunch number for whatever reason, then you may find that the shoots just keep growing. And then in summer, you trim the top. So yes, there is, I have heard people talking about this, and I have also seen this in practice where people refuse to trim the top. And if you don't trim the top and it hangs over and shades the leaves below, you'll get early senescence. And if a leaf doesn't get any sun flex and there's more than 3 leaves in front of it, it gets below the compensation point of light, and the vine says, hey, I'm wasting energy keeping this thing green, sends it yellow, and it drops off. That's if the canopy's hanging over. If the canopy is too long and needs to be cut, but you don't want to cut it, you've got I think it's called Pallas Aaja, or you've got to either tip it back down into the canopy or wrap it along the top wire.
Okay.
In theory, it's supposed to be less wounding for the vine, better balance, less hormonal disruption, because vines, they're complex machines, but they're simple machines in that they're sending hormones out and in and measuring the balance of those to know whether a shoot's growing, and telling what those signals are will be how the vine performs. So cutting the top off a vine disrupts that. So if you're of the mind that the vine is in harmony with itself, and cutting it, giving it a little haircut, or readjusting its priorities towards fruit is a bad thing, you won't tip it. But it comes down to planting density, water, nutrition, basically inherent balance.
Well, is this probably will be a good place to leave it then? Is inherent balance, which is hopefully us.
It's not in life, but in vineyards. Yes, we're trying to find balance. So it's always a tricky thing. Pruning is one of those amazing things that you can have a huge impact on not only one season ahead, but multiple seasons in advance. And you can't forget that inside those buds, it takes 15 months. It's there.
Wow.
The fruit that is inside that bud was formed the spring before. And before we get to pick it, it's well over a year in there. So you've always got to be thinking of what happened in the past and looking to the future.
Well, and hopefully that helps everyone to be better at pruning and to understand its importance. But
all the complexities, and perhaps confused more people, not only just by where I was looking, depending if meetings are on, but
no, but thank you for everyone who did join us. I mean, because so now we do it every 2 weeks, but we're going to try and put up some more smaller videos on YouTube. So keep on subscribing and having a look. We have got a Patreon that we're working on at the moment. If you do just want to just contribute to like our YouTube subscription and stuff like that, like us in general, but also please do message us for any questions or feedback or stuff you'd like discussed. We're more than happy to keep up doing this because we really enjoy it and respect it.
We are. We're very approachable. So if there's something that was mentioned during one of my diatribes on vine growth, if there's a concept you didn't quite understand, you just hit us up and we can put up an answer or answer your question.
But thanks again, everyone. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. And again, I was Gus Gluck.
And I'm still Dylan Grigg.
And we will catch you on the next one. Thank you all.
Stay cool. See you guys.